Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LCS week number 4 overview and analysis video of the summer split. We are back. We are so back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity away from the game, what was technically a 2-week break, but more so felt like a 3-week break just with everything going on. We've got some LCS games to talk about. Again, the Esports World Cup is over. Team Liquid did really well at the tournament. They ended up making the semifinals and being one game away from taking down eventual tournament winners T1 in the semifinals. And so there's a lot of things to like, even if I don't necessarily think the Esports World Cup was the most eye-opening tournament in terms of, showing us who these teams are for real. I think MSI was definitely a better indicator of real skill, but hopefully we can carry some of that momentum over into the domestic competition. I'm very excited. If you guys are as well, let me know down in the comments section below. If you are curious what I thought of the first 3 weeks, or maybe you just forgot because it's been a little while, check out the playlist up in the iCard right now. That's all 3 weeks of the LCS done in the same format as today. If you're interested in my thoughts on why I have certain teams in certain places in my power rankings, that is definitely a good place to start. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. If you are new here, what we do on this channel is we're going to go series by series talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series that we cover, and at the end of the video I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice neat little bow. Of course, we will also be updating my personal power rankings at the end of the video to kind of give you guys an idea of whether I think teams are moving up or down. Spoiler alert, I have essentially not changed my power rankings all year in the LCS. They have stayed almost entirely stagnant. There have been almost no upsets throughout the majority of this year, and there's really not been that much to talk about in terms of movement from these teams. It's basically played out as expected, and I will give a small spoiler alert. Not a lot's going to change coming out of week number 4. Basically, every single result was also anticipated here. So, at least we get to talk about the teams that are doing well and the teams that maybe aren't doing well, some of the changes I think they might make in order to do a little bit better moving forward. But that means starting off, of course, with day number 1 in our first series, and that's actually probably the most interesting one of the week, at least on paper, and probably in execution as well. Dignitas taking on Team Liquid. Liquid coming back, of course, from the Esports World Cup, from their overseas tenure. And they are going to come out and pick up a win, a 2-1 series win. So they are going to drop a game here. Dig is a relatively okay team, and I still think I have some confidence that they should be one of the top 4 or so teams in the LCS. But Team Liquid at, it pretty inarguably is top 2. Obviously in the standings, they've been top 2 this whole time. Most people are going to have them at number 1. I'm getting a lot closer to just saying, screw it, put them at number 1. Don't worry about it. It is what it is. But I still think there are some concerns that I have with this team, and some of the big ones are just, I'm worried about the meta right now. I don't think this is a particularly good meta for Team Liquid. Now, that might even be encouraging because this isn't a particularly good meta for Team Liquid, and yet they're still going undefeated. They're still doing really well, and that means what happens if the meta does start to shift into their favor? What happens when, NA realizes that, oh wait, like Sedge and Maokai are really good, and every other region in the world has figured that out, and those are the highest priority junglers everywhere else? What happens when North America realizes that, and, UMT ends up going back to that style? It's certainly going to be a bit more of a, okay, well, Team Liquid might even steamroll harder. It's definitely going to be interesting in that respect, but even with it not being, perfect for them in terms of the meta right now, they're still doing incredibly well. They're still dominating a lot of these games. Game 3 in particular was not particularly close. They looked great. I also want to shout this out at the beginning. Screw Riot's API. It just completely screwed up for this week. There is no, official record of these games on things like Leaguepedia or GOL, and so it's really, kind of a testament to having to go through the VODs and make sure that I get a lot of these right. If some of the game times are wrong, if, a score line is off by 1 kill or 1 assist or something like that, I tried my best to gather all this information, and I, tried to make sure that it was accurate in the most accurate way that I could get it with the screenshots at the end of the game, but there might be 1 or 2 things in this video that are more wrong than usual, at least in terms of just the raw numbers on the screen. The general vibe is obviously, fact-checked, but it's just weird. They don't have any of the records of it. It seems like the API just completely failed and did not track the games. They do not exist in the match history for the LCS in any of the programs, and so I don't really know what to say. Nothing happened this week in terms of the API, so hopefully that's fixed moving forward for the LCS, but I just wanted to make that disclaimer, again, in case, APA had 10 kills instead of 9, 9 kills or 5 deaths instead of 6 deaths across these 3 games. Like, if I got like one thing wrong like that, I do apologize, but I've tried to fact check this as much as possible. But let's get into the actual gameplay analysis. Player of the series is going to go to the aforementioned APA in the mid lane. I do think this was a very close race for me. Impact was amazing in this series and did look very consistent throughout all 3 games. I think he was most dominant in that game 1 on the Jax, but APA is just so freaking good on Ziggs. It's really hard to not notice him in basically every single situation that Team Liquid is in, and he was probably their best player in their game 2 loss as well. And at this point, I just kind of want to start giving him his flowers. He has like clearly proven himself as one of the top, 1, 2, or 3 mid laners in the region. He's up there with Jojo Pume. He's up there with Quid, whoever, Quad's probably in that conversation now, Jensen. He has risen above a lot of the mediocre mid laners. He is clearly in that upper echelon. To me, he's probably number 2 right now in terms of the performances, just because I really like Jojo Pume, but APA is awesome, and he has cemented himself as one of the best mid laners in North America, full stop. His champion pool is not a problem anymore. The Cassio was really good in game 1 as well. I want to shout that out. Impact was the other player, like I said, that I was considering. He is also having a phenomenal split. I would say those have clearly been their 2 best players so far in summer, which is really encouraging because it was really the Yan and Core JJ show for a majority of the spring split. They were the ones getting them wins, even when things were going wrong in the regular season, and of course, they were dominant in the playoffs as well. Impact kind of joined the party in the playoffs and, towards the back half of the regular season. But for APA to start being kind of a focal point for where Team Liquid want to put a lot of their resources, that's just good for them overall. And then, of course, it's not like Yan, Core, and Umti are playing bad. Core, in particular, had a great series. I just think that the solo laners were definitely the standouts here for Liquid. And for Dignitas on the other side, they're a fine team. I honestly feel kind of bad that they're now sitting at 1-3. They have played the 3 best teams in the league, and they are just not one of the 3 best teams in the league. They have lost to Cloud9, they've lost to Team Liquid, and they have lost to FlyQuest. I don't think they lose the rest of this regular season. That would be my anticipation because they still played pretty well in this series. Jensen, I thought, had a great series in the mid lane. People are going to criticize the Zilean pick, but those are people that just don't know Jensen. This is his best champion, and it always has been. I know you can argue Orianna. Some people are even going to throw out things like a Nivea. I think those are generally okay takes, but Zilean has always been the one that he has been able to go to, year in and year out, regardless of the meta, regardless of what state Zilean's in, and be able to be very effective. I really like pairing that up with something like the Kindred. I think from an idea perspective, it's really smart. From Dig, unfortunately, they just couldn't quite capitalize on that because the Kindred got so far behind, and Spica is going to get done of the series for that Kindred game. I want to praise the Ivern. I think the Ivern works for this team. Again, if you just want to enable a lot of these other more experienced carries, things, players like Jensen on Trist or Sven on Callista. Yeah, I think the Ivern makes a lot of sense. It also makes Licorice's job a lot easier to play things like Poppy and not really have to worry about being out of position. Obviously, Isles will help with that as well, but the Kindred is really what he is getting this stud of the series for. Hopefully, he can clean up some of those more, shaky carry performances. He's not exactly been perfect at the beginning of this split. If there is, one player that I'm really concerned about, it's probably Isles on this team, but Spica is a close second. Those are the 2 that I think have yet to be able to perform. Licorice has also not been all that great. Impact is one of those players that just kind of beats people, and so I'm not going to hold it against him too much, but I need to see him start getting back into that conversation for just like winning games on his own. It's something he really just hasn't done over the course of this split yet. But Jensen and Sven, I think, are playing well. Sven in particular, I think, has been great. Isles has certainly been up and down. I think he's been really bad in their losses, their game losses at the very least, but there is upside to this Dignitas team, and what my expectation is that they're going to go on a pretty big win streak down the stretch here to really prove that, yeah, we're not maybe the best team in the league, but we are good enough to be able to pick up wins against these other, more, up and down teams, we'll say. And for Liquid, I mean, they are the best team in the LCS. They're the defending champions. They're undefeated now. I think dropping a game here might actually matter. That's the crazy thing, is that, these records are very close, and they've been tied for first place for basically this whole split with Cloud9 in terms of game score. Depending, of course, on what happens later in the week, they could have lost their first place spot because of that game loss in game number 2. But regardless, I mean, they're undefeated in series score, and this team just continues to truck along. There is no, mid-season slump coming in from them. They do not seem like they're coming back from the Esports World Cup and fatigued in any way. This is just one of the best teams in the West, and that has become abundantly clear. And then moving on to our second series of the first day here in week 4, and it's a battle of the pseudo-green teams, I guess it's fair to say here. Immortals taking on FlyQuest, and predictably FlyQuest is going to be able to take this 2-0. No real upset here, this was definitely anticipated, but Immortals just continues to show that people were overrating them at the beginning of this split. They ended up with a big victory over Shopify, and they looked pretty good in that series, and everybody's like, Tactical's the GOAT, he's the best NA player of all time. Castle and Mask are starting to figure it out. Ole is my favorite player ever. Like, you know, they're going to be amazing. And all of a sudden they start falling apart as predicted just because Shopify was pretty bad and this team has its own question marks. I certainly do think those question marks are becoming more and more apparent, but, you know, I really have no faith in this Immortals team, and I really don't see any reason to have faith in this Immortals team. I don't think bottom 2 has ever been more clear than it is right now, but for Fly, this team is really good, and I think if Team Liquid and Cloud9 weren't as good as they were right now, then it would be clear that FlyQuest is like a Worlds team, going to be a finals contender, you know, going to compete for the #1 seed. It's just unfortunate that they exist right now, where there are also some really good top-end talent teams in the LCS, like TL and Cloud9, that they've not really been able to scoop up one of those spots, but they've been essentially untouchable ever since that series against Team Liquid that they lost, and this was another example of that. Player of the series could go to a variety of people. I would give it to either Inspired or Masu. I think it definitely has to go to one of them. I'm giving it to Inspired. The jungle canyon in this series was absolutely ginormous. We will get to Armeo in just a second, who is just completely, he's out, he's done. Like, there's nothing else left to say. I'm going to try to be nuanced about that conversation because you're not hearing any nuance about Armeo right now. It's just Armeo bad and nothing else really, and I think there is more to the conversation, at least for Immortals, in terms of making a decision than that, but you know, Inspired is so much better than everybody he plays against at this level for the most part. It is really funny because there are real flaws to Inspired's game. I think his mentality is very exploitable when he plays other players that are as good as him. But that's not happening domestically. Like, that doesn't exist here in North America. And when it does, like with someone like Blabber, for instance, like Inspired can still get a lot of advantages through his winning lanes, and Blabber also is going to make mistakes. And so, you know, Inspired never really is going to get punished at a domestic level. If you are looking for somebody that can almost always be considered an MVP favorite going into a split, Inspired is the guy. He plays for objectives, he plays for kills, he's the best team-fighting jungler in the West, and it's not even particularly close. Is his early pressure always perfect? No, he's really not a great early game jungler, and he can be very exploited in that regard because he can sometimes just have a lack of pressure, but his ability to play out the mid to late game is very consistent and is just stronger than everybody else at this level in terms of a macro sense, and it just allows him to get these advantages that others can't. Brand is so broken right now, and Game 2 is just another example of that. We've seen so many over the course of this year, but Masu was the other player to definitely consider. That Ashe game was brilliant. Those arrows were brilliant. His ability to just be self-sustaining is really good right now. I think I've talked about this in basically every other region's videos, and so I might as well bring it up in the LCS one, but this is a really interesting AD carry meta because marksman mid are so strong, like carry marksman mid are so strong. Really what you're valuing the most out of a marksman in the bot lane right now in terms of drafting is someone who can be self-sufficient, is somebody who doesn't need a lot of investment or resources in order to be good at the thing they're good at, you know? Misfortune is getting a lot of bans in a lot of other regions because you don't need any investment for MF to be really strong in lane. We saw Caitlyn in the LEC this past weekend. You know, those kinds of things are going to be good in lane. They're going to be relevant in the late game, regardless of whether or not they get a lot of resources or investment, but more notably, Ezreal, Ashe, Jhin. These are the champions that I think are really going to be defining the bot lane meta, in my opinion, the strongest picks right now, and we're seeing that here. Masu's great at Ezreal. Masu was even better on Ashe. If you're really good on these more utility-oriented, kind of, I don't want to say passive, but just like resourceless AD carries, then you're going to be more valuable in the game right now. Ezreal does not need a lot of resources in order to be useful late. Ashe does not need a lot of resources in order to be useful late, and so you can pick it relatively free. And then you can pick something like Bard that can go and win Tristana and Corki their own laning phase and play with the brand and try to get that AP brand ahead and just like AFK, not worry about bot lane. It really is an interesting strategy. A lot of teams have started moving towards it, and the teams that, you know, adapt better to it are just going to do better straight up. Bwipo was really good in side lanes. He was very solid this series in the macro sense. A much better series than what he has offered in recent memory. I thought this was really solid from him. Quad was fine. Got a lot of assistance in this series, but generally did well with the resources he was given. Fly is a very good team. Again, without Team Liquid and Cloud9 in the league, this would be one of the scariest teams in the LCS. Unfortunately, there are a couple of really good teams at the top of the standings. And for Immortals, their problems are just so clear to me. Like, it is so obvious what the issue with this team is. You can talk about the things they do right, I think Tactical is a relatively interesting player. I think he's overhyped. I certainly don't think he's as good as Reddit would make him out to be. He's not a top 4 AD carry in the region. He's just somewhere around that like 5 spot where he's going to be competing and generally relevant in a lot of these games, but he's not good enough to carry Immortals to wins. Ole is certainly not good enough to be that partner for him in the bot lane, but the top side of this map, like, yeah, the problems are clear. Armeo is going to get yet another dud of the series. He's gotten plenty of these over the course of this year so far. And Armeo's problems are very obvious. Like, I think he is just kind of a conduit for Immortals issues as a whole, because not only is Armeo playing poorly, I think his confidence is completely shot. I think he's making bad decisions, and I think generally Armeo is the kind of player who functions much better when he has winning lanes. He's not like a losing lanes kind of player. He just isn't a player who can like salvage a position like that. But also, the reason Castle and Mask are really starting to concern me is because this team feels like they have no communication, like literally negative communication. As bad as Armeo has been, it's so much worse because Castle is constantly going in on his own and Mask is constantly going in on his own, and Armeo is clearly disconnected from what the rest of this team is doing and how they want to make their decisions and what direction they want to go in. It is very clear that he is just not on the same page as everybody else on this team, and that's why I do think you need a replacement, but why I don't think just plugging and playing a quote-unquote better player here in the jungle is going to fix things. You need someone who can actually communicate and play well with Castle and Mask, because right now they are just on their own planet. They are on their own island trying to do their own things, and that's just not a recipe for success. So as much as I'd like to sit here and say that just replacing Armeo would be the thing to do, I don't think if you just put a better jungler in here, it would make things better. I think Castle and Mask would still continue to struggle with playing with the rest of the team. And so Immortals has their own issues. They're more talented than a team like Shopify, which keeps them out of the bottom spot, but it's not by a lot. They're really a lot closer than you would think. And then for FlyQuest, like, this is one of the best teams in the league. Like I said, they're going to be competing for the top of the standings. This is likely a team that will end up going to Worlds, and I think that's fine for NA as a whole. I just worry about the consistency of them when they play teams that actually are mechanically talented enough to be able to test them, because that's just not something they run into a lot here in North America, but at the very least, domestically, it ends up working out for them. And then moving on now to day number 2, and we're going to pick up basically right where we left off with a pretty dominant series here between Cloud9 and 100 Thieves, where Cloud9 is going to pick up the 2-0 series win, winning in under 30 minutes, or I guess around 30 minutes in both games. These were both very controlled from C9, and they continue to stay undefeated. And I think more importantly, at least in their eyes, they won this 2-0, which means they moved to 8-1. They're in first place by themselves, with Team Liquid dropping a game against Dignitas. That means that C9 does have the better game record going into, the rest of this season, going into week number 5. It's a nice place for C9 to be. I don't know how long they're going to hold on to that. That matchup against Team Liquid is certainly going to be the most interesting one left on their schedule, but they have yet to play a lot of the best teams. Their schedule actually has been relatively easy outside of their Dignitas series, so we'll continue to see how they adapt, but for 100 Thieves, I think they were just a little bit overhyped. Honestly, at this point, they are who they are. I was really pushing back on the 100 Thieves hype coming out of week number 1, and it was still kind of there after week 2. I think we're at the point now where we can go, yeah, 100 Thieves is a good team. They're probably, the 5th or the 6th best team in the LCS, but they're not better than that. The top 4 hype that they were getting for a lot of the first couple weeks, it's just not real, and it was never real. And so I hate to be like, I'm glad that, they're coming back down to earth, but I think my, projections unfortunately were correct on that front. So we'll talk about what happened in this series. Player of the series was super easy for me. It's going to go to Vulcan, the support for C9, and this is very encouraging, mostly because Vulcan, quite frankly, has just not been good for a little while. He was really bad last split for this team. He was kind of rough last year for FlyQuest as well, just wasn't really playing well when he went over in the summer split, wasn't perfect for Evil Geniuses in spring either when they were still in the league. It's been a little bit since Vulcan has really performed like an upper tier support, and so you were really just kind of hoping and praying that you would get some sort of bounce back from him in summer, that this team would gel and click in a way that it just didn't in the spring split, and so far that has kind of proven to be true. Berserker and Vulcan have been infinitely better as a bot lane. I do think this meta fits them relatively well. You can still go for those hyper carries that Berserker is really good at, but he's great on these self-sufficient AD carries, things like Ashe and Jhin. Berserker can play that really well. Vulcan is allowed to be this roamer that I think he really kind of broke out on. He's not really an enchanter player. It's not really his style. He can do it, but I think one of the reasons we've seen Vulcan struggle is that we have been in more of an enchanter meta over the past few years. I think getting back closer to what the meta was, 2 or 3 years ago when he was at the peak of his performances, I think is going to be really good for him. So The bot lane really gapping 100 Thieves is really big. Berserker was awesome. You know, Berserker on Zeri is ridiculous. He's like mini Pays. I will continue to stand by that. They are very similar players in terms of how they play the game. Berserker might be a tad bit better in the early game. He's not quite as automatic in the late game, but they're both incredibly good at Zeri, and so it very much stands out in that way. Blabber was awesome here. Nidalee is, you know, one of those picks that gets memed on until it's played by an actually good player, and then it looks incredibly dominant. He just completely gapped River in this matchup. Thanatos was really, really good on the top side. There have been, you know, I would say justifiable concerns with Thanatos. I think he's been better than he's been given credit for. I think the expectations were just way too high. He has been basically exactly what I anticipated him being, which is an upper half top laner, not somebody who's going to dominate year one, but somebody who could grow into a monster, and he is getting better game after game. JoJo was really good, definitely better than Quid on the other side of this matchup, and so just a lot of positives for Cloud9, a lot of really good performances. You're happy to see that. In 400 Thieves on the other side, it's basically the opposite. A lot of bad performances, a lot of things to worry about, if we're being entirely honest, most notably the bot lane, who just got run over. They got exposed in this series. Meech and Ayla, I think, did really well for themselves in the spring split to kind of say, screw it, I know that we weren't exactly projected to be all that good, but, you know, we are going to be perfect as this weak side, low resource bot lane. You would think going into this split, where that is kind of the priority in terms of where you would, you know, want them to be, is weak side, Ashe, you know, things like that. You would think they would really pop off, that this would kind of be the meta for them, but Meech, unfortunately, seems to have regressed a little bit back towards the mean. He's going to get done of the series here. I think you could very realistically give this to Ayla as well. I thought Ayla was more active, which is why he's not quite going to get it for me, but it should go to one of the members of this bot lane who both looked really bad. I think they've looked worse and worse series over series, which is definitely a bit concerning. I'm more concerned about Meech than I am about Ayla. I think Ayla has a much better track record, and I think generally has better prospect pedigree in terms of the tape that I saw at the tier 2 level, but, you know, Meech was somebody that other people really liked a lot, and so it is a bit disappointing to see them kind of go through some struggles. Hopefully they can, you know, get through it and get out the other side. Topside was also horrible. Like, Sniper got obliterated by Thanatos, didn't do anything in this series. You don't go 1-7-2 by accident in these games. River was awful, got completely gapped by Blabber's Nidalee throughout the entirety of this series. People love River. I love River. I think he's a really good player, a top 3 jungler in the LCS, but Blabber is better, and that was proven here. And then Quid, unfortunately, he's just not been able to maintain that MVP level form. I think his laning is still very good, but, you know, if the other parts of the map aren't going to be able to survive, Quid's not going to be able to do the things that he does really well. He requires good game states in order to function as an MVP level player. He benefited a lot from having not only River as his jungler, but good lanes last split, and that's just not there so far in summer, and so they're just struggling a lot more. I think we kind of know who this team is when they start playing some of the weaker teams in the league. I think they're going to be just fine, but at least for now, like 1-3 is not entirely surprising given their schedule, and 4-0 is certainly not surprising to me for Cloud9. I had them number 1 in my power rankings all year long, or all split long. That's definitely been, you know, contrarian. I've gotten a lot of comments telling me why I'm really dumb to do that, but they just continue to look really good, and they're going to be sitting alone at the top of the standings after week 4. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week. Only 4 here, of course, in the LCS, the second series of day 2, and it's kind of a gray team matchup if you want to go with the color schemes. It's Energy taking on Shopify Rebellion, and Energy predictably is also going to pick up a 2-0 win. Not because Energy is some amazing team that is dominating at the top of the standings, but rather because Shopify is just in complete and utter disarray at this point. They are not a good team. They are 0-4, 0-8. They have yet to even win a single game so far in the summer split. Strong argument to be made that they are the worst team in any major region right now. I'm sure Rogue and Breon will contest that in terms of just pure talent, but you know, even I couldn't have predicted Shopify to play this bad, to be this bad in a lot of different areas. They are just not good. They are not good in every area of the game. Energy has a lot of problems, and honestly, they probably shouldn't have won this series 2-0, but they were still able to pull it out, if only because Shopify is more experienced than them at throwing games in the late game, and so that's where we ended up landing. It's hard not to talk about this series being a banger. Like, these games were really fun, but I have two minds, right? As an analyst first, I'm like, this series sucked. The gameplay quality was really low. Honestly, these players played really poorly. The games were really fun because of that, but it does kind of take away a bit. There are bangers that are really fun and chaotic, and, you know, there are mistakes, but still the games are fun. Then there's bangers like this where it's just like, nothing is really happening. Everybody's making mistakes. Nobody ever really makes progress in the game, and they go 50 minutes, you know, 54 and 40 46 minutes respectively in games 1 and 2, and it's just not quite as fun as maybe some of the other really like chaotic back and forth series that we've gotten, but somehow, someway, Energy is able to close out both of these games by hitting the Nexus last, and it just kind of is what it is. Player of the series is going to go to Contracts in the jungle. He was much better on the Brand in game number 1 than he was on the Karthus in game 2, but at the end of, game 2, all he had to do was press R. Like, truly, they got to the point. You're 46 minutes into the game, you are down in kills. You're 9 kills down. I mean, more than that, for most of this game, and Contracts is still inevitable because it's Karthus, and all he has to do is press R because it's 46 minutes, and he's got 4 items. He instantly deletes everybody in the game. He's getting it because he by far was the most effective person on the map, even if his gameplay individually wasn't really all that good. I definitely considered Palafox for this. I think from a general perspective, he was a bit more consistent in terms of what he offered, but honestly, he wasn't great either. I don't think anybody played really all that well in this series. Dud of the series, in fact, is actually going to stay on the winning side. It's going to go to Huhi in the support position. What were some of those engages in game 2? That Nautilus was brutal, like truly not good. It really was rough trying to watch Huhi attempt to do anything. All he really did was give Kaisa infinite gold in that second game, and I'm a big fan of Huhi. I don't think he's been at his best over the course of this year. Him and FBI have really not gotten that synergy back from their 100 Thieves days, and it's been a bit disappointing to watch. Hopefully that can start to grow a bit more, because right now it's really not working for this bot lane, even if I think their problems are a bit overblown, like at least in terms of the community. They are right to point in the direction of it is worse than it should be. I think that, mentality is correct, even if I don't think they've been like a bottom 2 bot lane or something like that. I think, there have been worse bot lanes than FBI and Huhi, but Energy needs to be better than this. This didn't make me feel better about this team. I get it. They get to 500 here. They get above 500 in terms of game score. Like, all of that on paper looks really good, but those 2 series wins that they now have are against Immortals and Shopify, the only 2 teams that they should be projected to beat. I really don't think they're going to do all that well against basically anybody else from here on out, and I think it's very likely that they don't win another series the rest of this regular season. This certainly didn't change my mind on that. And for Shopify, somehow, some way, even in the most unlosable of situations, you end up losing them. You can't win a game. Like, this team is immune to winning games, and it's quite frustrating to watch. They even made a roster substitution coming back out of the break. Tomio is out, Boogie is in the jungle, and we're still sitting here talking about, well, what do they have to do in order to get a game, let alone a series? And honestly, they've already played their easiest series. They've played Immortals, they played Energy, and they've been 0-2'd by both of them, and so there's just nothing else really to talk about. B-Boy is incredibly good, and on a better team, he would be somebody that's talked about as a potential MVP candidate, but he's stuck on the worst team in the league, and there's nothing he can do about it. I thought Zeyzal was generally fine in this series, was probably the better support of these two, at least in terms of, not making errors. I thought Insanity was fine, Boogie was generally fine, Fake God was generally fine. The problem for Shopify is they just don't have that ability to win when it matters, is win in the late game. Their early games can sometimes be horrible against good teams. Fake God in particular has really bad laning phases, and jungle's been a bit of an issue early on in games, but they have the talent to be able to go 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 against anybody, in the middle part of the standings against teams like Energy and 100 Thieves, but their macro holds them back so much. The coaching staff of this team, I think, really holds this team back a lot, and so you're just sitting here and Shopify is basically already doomed. I don't really know what else to say. Obviously, they're not done and dusted, but they don't have a single win, and the schedule only gets harder from here, as I said. So I'm not really expecting anything much from this team moving forward. And for Energy, the best has probably already happened. I don't think that this was an encouraging sign. You should have lost game 2. You should have probably lost game number 1 as well. It really just was not a good look. Both teams kind of got 0-2'd here, if we're being entirely honest. And so walking out of this, it doesn't make me feel better or worse about either of these teams. It honestly just makes me feel the exact same, which is really bad in both of their cases. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCS Week 4 overview and analysis video here in the summer split. Do hope you guys enjoyed. Up on the screen, of course, the updated standings after 4 weeks of action. Any ties are just broken alphabetically. I still have to say that because we have 1 tie in 6th place still here in the LCS, but, we're getting closer and closer to not having any ties, which will be much easier. If you see any teams highlighted in green, that's going to be the top 2 here, the 2 teams that are undefeated. That means they have officially locked their spot in into the playoffs. They are in. Like, just Cloud9 and Team Liquid are in after week number 4. I know that feels like it's crazy, but remember, every team only plays one series a week. It's single round robin. If you get 4 wins, you're locked. There's no way you can miss playoffs at that point. And so that's the magic number for everybody to hit moving forward. But of course, on every single one of these teams, little things here, you can see a couple of things on the right-hand side. Power rank is where I personally power rank these teams from number 1 to number 10. Changes how they have changed from last week to this week. And I think for the 3rd week in a row, I'm not making any changes. There are just no changes to make. These teams are playing exactly as anticipated. I think theoretically you could maybe move. I mean, people still are going to want Team Liquid to be number 1, but again, until Team Liquid beats Cloud9, I'm going to stick with my preseason prediction of Cloud9 having the higher upside. Even if I do think Team Liquid has looked better over the course of this split, they're basically 1A and 1B until they prove, until which one of them proves that they can come out and beat the other. But nobody else, I think, even has a case to be moved. Like, there really is genuinely nothing else that I think you could argue for. I mean, maybe Energy moving up to number 5, but like, I don't think Energy is better than 100 Thieves. I think they just had an easier schedule. I think when 100 Thieves starts playing Immortals and Shopify Rebellion, they're also going to be picking up wins. Remember, that one win that 100 Thieves has is against Energy, and so I imagine things get better for them. Dig, I still think, is a top 4 team regardless of their record because their 3 losses are against the 3 best teams in the league. I just feel very confident these power rankings are where they are right now for a reason, and I just don't feel the need to change them. Let me know if you agree or disagree with that for the 3rd straight week down in the comments section below. But with that being said, it's time to move into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 4. Player of the week was a pretty easy decision, honestly. It's going to go to Vulcan, the support for Cloud9. I really didn't have to think about this all that much. Vulcan was the best player in the LCS in week number 4. I honestly don't even think it was all that close. I really do think you have to give it to someone on Cloud9. Their series was just so dominant and so impressive, and Vulcan, to me in particular, really showed off that he's still there. Like the Vulcan we all know and love, he hasn't just completely disappeared. The good moments can still be there even if the consistency hasn't been. The honorable mentions, APA, the mid laner for Team Liquid, he was the most valuable player in that series, and that was the most fun and competitive series of the week. And then Inspired, who also kind of destroyed in that matchup the jungler for FlyQuest. Those are the 2 honorable mentions, but Vulcan was a pretty easy choice for player of the week overall for me. And then dud of the week are another easy choice, Armeo, the jungler for Immortals. He's the worst player in the LCS right now, and it's not particularly close. That's crazy considering he's not on the 0-8 team right now. You would assume that that's how it ends up going, but Armeo really has been that bad. Immortals is a kind of interesting team, and as I've talked about, I don't think it's entirely his fault that he's been as bad as he has been. I think the communication on that team is clearly awful. He does not have any synergy with the 2 solo laners, and Tactical just kind of does his own thing. Like, there is no corralling it, but this is not a good situation for Armeo to succeed, and those performances are really showing that he is in a really bad spot in terms of the gameplay, and it's not going to get better. And so he's dud of the week, and he's on pace to really not have a very good year overall, which is unfortunate. But Armeo, dud of the week, Vulcan, player of the week. Let me know if you agree or disagree with those decisions down in the comment section below. But that is going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. And then, of course, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LCS, we post about all 4 of the major regions, LCS, LEC, LCK, and LPL every single week. And of course, we also post about the NACL Tier 2 here in North America every single week. So if you're interested in that, hit the subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all